Hi, I'm Kelly Ferris, and I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Student Involvement. I'd like to welcome you all to today's workshop. This workshop is part of our Thursdays at 3 Leadership Series, which is a new event series we're bringing to you this semester. Every Thursday at 3 p.m., you can tune in to learn more about leadership development, student involvement, and student organization management topics. I would also like to mention that this session is being recorded and will be made available on the Center for Student Involvement's YouTube channel. Today, we are joined by Christa Dell'Isola from the Career Center to talk with us about representing our student involvement and leadership experiences on resumes and in the job interviews in ways that make us stand out from the crowd. Christa, thanks for joining us, and at this time, we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's great to get to be a part of this leadership series. So today, like Kelly said, I'm going to be talking about what's in your leadership experience and how to actually prepare for the job hunt based on that experience that you have from your involvement on campus. So just to get started, let me hit this button. Just to get started, a little bit about me. My name is Christa Dell'Isola. I am a program assistant in the Career Center here at K-State. And a little bit of my background, I worked for multiple companies over the years, a couple of those being the Walt Disney Company, Teach for America, and Ramsey Solutions. And I share that with you to give you a little bit of background as into how I know a little bit about this subject. And in my previous roles, I've had the opportunity to get to interview and hire different employees. I also obviously have worked for multiple companies, so I've gone through the interview process a good amount of time. So I have a little bit of experience on both sides. And so that's where I'm kind of going to be pulling from to share with you today about how to best prepare for that interview experience. And a lot of where this has come from is my work at Ramsey Solutions. I did get to hire lots of people from entry-level jobs to also working with some higher up leadership roles. So, okay, so that's a little bit about me. So let's go ahead and get started. So if you were a hiring manager, I want you to think, what would you actually look for in a new hire? Okay, so in a new hire, we're probably going to look for people who have some job experience, right? Who seem like they are hard workers, they have some communication skills, they probably have some teamwork skills depending on the job. So we're going to look for people that can show that on their resume, right? What are some things we're going to avoid? Okay, so looking at the other end, we want to avoid people that clearly show up late to their interview, maybe don't even really try to show those skills throughout their resume or throughout their interview. So just kind of think about that. Who are the people, maybe even if you have a job that you would want to avoid hiring for working with you? Okay, so we're going to avoid having those on our resume or showing those in an interview. So let's talk about what employers are actually looking for. So this was a survey that was done a couple years back by the National Association of Colleges and Employers about the employer's view of needs versus proficiencies of career readiness competencies. So we have 7 different competencies listed here, and this is where employers said that they considered these skills to be essential. So noticing that they considered professionalism and work ethic, 100% of them said that's definitely a requirement that we need to see. And then going down from there, problem solving, teamwork, communication, leadership, career management, and global and multicultural fluency. So this is what employers want to see. And the employers that were pulled in this are looking at their recent hires that have recently graduated. So this is what they're hoping to get in those employees that they're hiring. Now, if we actually compare that with what they're actually feeling that they're seeing. So this is, again, looking at those recently hired graduates and rating of their proficiency. And if you notice, there's a gap there, right? So none of the areas do they actually meet the hopes of the employers. So there are some that are definitely larger gaps, professionalism and work ethic being one, being the largest one actually. And I think that that's just something of a generational gap in how different generations do work and how they show their professionalism. So I like to think back to an example that I have from working in an office I helped run a little bit. And I would walk past this one employee, and every time I walked past his desk, he was on Facebook. And it drove me crazy because that's just not very professional, right? So you don't want your employer to see that you're always on social media when you should be working, right? We don't want to be doing that. So just different things. Cell phones, huge deal, right? Do you have them out in a meeting? Do you not have them out? That kind of shows also professionalism and kind of your work ethic. If your boss passes by your desk and every time you're texting someone, they're probably going to wonder, when are you getting work done? Don't get me wrong, you can probably have your cell phone at work depending on the job, but it's how much you're checking your phone kind of thing. Some other areas where there's a big gap: communication. As we look at the different generations, we definitely communicate slightly differently. This newer generation is text, very much phone, and not all generations have had that. So there is sometimes a gap between how we communicate and how we even write emails in those professional settings, and just knowing what's the right thing to say and what's not the right thing to say. So as you can notice, there is a little bit of a gap, and that's something that we want to try and help close. We want to help you as you get ready to graduate and go into the job hunt to be able to kind of close that gap and show that you do have those teamwork, problem solving, communication, all of those skills. So that way, when you get into the workforce, you're going to be different than these numbers. You're going to stand out to employers and show, wow, they really have all of this together. So, do you have those competencies? Now, most likely, if you're watching this, you are in a leadership role on campus. So, most likely, you probably do have some of those competencies, if not all of them. So, I have them up here listed again. So, like I said, leadership, communication, problem solving, professionalism, work ethic. All of those are things that you're probably gaining right now, but it's about, do you know how to represent those, and do you know how to utilize those really well once you start a new job? So this is a quote from the director of the Career Success Center. They're a private research university. And he said that we find that students are really engaged and active on campus, involved with all kinds of experiential learning activities, internships, study abroad, student clubs, and organizations. But when they come to us for help with their resume and to prepare for the workforce, those things don't come to the surface. They go from activity to activity, but are not understanding what they are getting out of it and how it connects with life after college. Okay, so basically what he's saying, you're doing all of these things on campus, and they're all actually really beneficial to you and actually helping prepare you for the workforce, but we're not representing them well. We're not sharing our story really well about why those skills are important and why being in a leadership role in your student organization is important, and what those things are that you've learned from that experience. So we want to make sure that we actually represent those really, really well. So what I want you to do is go ahead, pause the video here for a minute or two, take some time, and write down, just jot really quickly. You'll find this in the folder, the OneDrive folder of documents. And you can save it to your own, so that way it doesn't save to the OneDrive folder that it's in. Just download a copy of it, and then you can work in this in the bullet points and just quickly type in, or you can even just do this on a scratch piece of paper. Just quickly write down, how do you have leadership? How do you have communication from your different activities on campus? So for example, maybe you lead meetings for your organization. That's communication. Write that down real quick. Maybe you lead a committee, teamwork, put it underneath there. So just jot down different ideas of how you're utilizing these skills, and then come back after you've done that. Okay, so now hopefully you have written down just kind of the surface level, different ways that you utilize those competencies on a regular basis throughout your student organizations. We're going to take those to the next level and how to actually use them on your resume. But for now, we just at least have an idea of, here are multiple ways, hopefully, that you have all of those skills. Okay, so when it comes to resumes, right? Resumes can be scary because you're kind of putting everything on one sheet of paper. but they don't have to be. Take the time, make a really great resume, come work with the Career Center. We'd love to meet with you and hone in your resume and make sure that it's really great before you start applying for jobs. But if you use some of these skills that we're going to talk about in writing, your resume really is going to stick out. And remember, this is the way that you represent all of that to an employer. At this point of seeing your resume, they probably haven't met you. So you really need to get the point across of what are those things that you're doing and what are those skills that you're gaining from those different things. So the first part of your resume, or the first step to writing a really great resume, be descriptive. Okay, so we want to share as much information, but also knowing a resume is only so many bullet points and so many pages. So be descriptive where you can. So for example, let's say that you've organized a volunteer project. You can put that on your resume, right? That's actually a really great thing to put on your resume. Now let's look at this bullet point underneath whatever student organization I'm in. Organized a volunteer project versus organized a food drive with over 50 volunteers to collect donations for the K-State food pantry. Which one sticks out more? Probably the second, right? It's a little bit more descriptive. They know what kind of event it was, not just a volunteer project, and about how many people were there. So be descriptive. That really will make your little points stick out on your resume. Next, use numbers when possible. And I put a caveat, use numbers when they look good too. You don't want to say, I had a budget of $3 and don't do that. Okay, use those numbers when they're really good numbers. So for example, here's kind of a plain one. Planned an awards event for student organizations. Now, I can use numbers from that event that I planned and say, I planned the annual Student Organization Awards event with a budget of $5,000 for over 200 attendees. Those numbers sound pretty impressive, right? So $5,000 is a lot, especially this is something if you're doing in college with a student organization, that's a pretty good budget to be working with. And over 200 attendees is a pretty high number. So again, use numbers when they're beneficial for you and they make your responsibilities sound a little bit better, but try to use them as much as you can. I think it really does make it stand out. And again, it goes back to that being descriptive. Okay, so next one, use action verbs. This is probably the one thing that everybody hears always about resumes. Use action verbs. This is super easy to find different ones. If you even just Google action verbs for resumes, you're going to find tons and tons of lists of action verbs. So for example, made training materials for new officers versus developed sounds a lot better than made. And again, I'm trying to be extra descriptive here. So developed unique training materials for 5 different positions to guide officers in their new roles. Notice again, I did use a number here, and 5 here is a good number because it kind of depends on what you're talking about. Again, $5 versus doing something specific for 5 different positions. That's pretty big difference. So if you're going to use those numbers again, just make sure that it makes sense and is adding value, and always, always, always use action verbs. Okay, so this is another great one. Utilize a task plus a skill plus a result. You're not going to be able to do this on every bullet point, and that's okay. So for example, a task would be assisted students with scheduling appointments over the phone and in person. Still sounds pretty good, right? Can we add a skill? I utilized customer service skills in scheduling student appointments over the phone and in person. So you're showing and explaining directly, this is the skill that I use to do this. And then if you can, add a result. This is one that can be a little bit harder to add in, depending on how long you've been at your job or within your student organization and if your project's completed, but received high customer satisfaction ratings for customer service provided to students calling to schedule appointments. That one sounds a lot more developed than the very first one. Again, you're not always going to have all 3, but especially if you can get the first 2, it's really, really helpful. Just straight out tell the employer, this is the skill that I used. And if you can, here are the results that I got from using that skill. Be relevant. This is very important to the job that you're applying for. So I know some of us, as we apply for jobs, There are going to be some that are kind of in different lanes, right? We're not going to be applying always for the exact same type of job. So it might make more sense to take different pieces of your resume and move them to the top. So put those relevant items at the top. And make sure that you're just aligning with what that job is. So I know when I was applying for jobs, I had two different types of resumes, one for certain business types of jobs and one for more education focused jobs. So just go ahead and make sure that you modify it as necessary. You don't have to have 52 types of resumes ready, but maybe even just a couple to make sense for the jobs that you're applying for. Also, if you can't talk about it, don't include it. So I don't know about you, but when I was in college, I joined every organization that I could. If there was a flyer for it, I joined it. And so I think by my senior year, I was in 8 or 10 organizations. Really, I was only in about 3 because only 3 were the ones that I was super involved in. Those ones made sense to put on my resume. The other ones that I went to maybe once a semester don't really make sense. I couldn't have talked about those. So make sure that what you're doing on campus, you're going deep instead of wide, can make a big difference. And then if you want to go wide, that's fine too. Just only include those ones that you truly can talk about on your resume, because you don't want to get into an interview and them ask, what's that experience been like in this organization? You'd be like, I haven't really gone to anything with that organization, but I have it on my resume. We don't want that, okay? So just make sure if you can't talk about it, don't include it. Okay, so again, going back over those resume pieces, be descriptive, use numbers, use action verbs, utilize a skill plus a task plus result when possible, and be relevant. So what I want you to do here is go ahead and pause again for, give yourself a couple minutes, go back to that worksheet that we were working on, your skills, and take a couple of those areas, whether it's leadership, teamwork, communication, and grab some of those things that you started to write down that you're doing and take and make a bullet point that you could use on your resume. So make it descriptive, utilize numbers when possible, action verbs, skill, task, result, and make it relevant. So take a couple minutes now, go ahead and see if you can't define a couple of those bullet points that you can add to your resume after this presentation. Okay, so now hopefully we've got our resumes started and we've got a couple really great bullet points that we can put on there. So we're going to actually talk about the interview, right? So you have this awesome resume now. You've got these really great points underneath your student involvement. Now you've actually got to an interview. Let's talk about some tips for actually interviewing. Okay, so step 1, we've already kind of talked about this in an earlier slide, but be professional. Dress for the job that you want, right? So you always want to overdress a little bit for an interview. Even if you're just getting a part-time job, you still want to, let's say it's at a store in the mall, you still want to at least dress business casual, right? Be very professional. Don't be playing on your cell phone while you wait for them to come and get you for your interview. Keep your cell phone put away. Have a pad folio maybe with your resume in it. Just make sure to come across as very professional, not only in how you look and appear, but in also how you communicate about your experience. Give examples. This is really important. If someone says, how have you used leadership throughout your college career, right? We don't want to just kind of talk about this is leadership and this is why I like it. We want to give specific examples. So in my student organization, I got to lead our efforts for this, this, and this, right? Give as many examples as possible, and that makes sense to the question. Utilize the job description in your answers. So if they say that they want someone that has communication skills, talk about how you communicate really, really well. That should hopefully specifically about communication come across well in the interview, but also share back about those skills that you have and pick out a couple from the job description and kind of have those in the back of your head as you start answering questions in an interview. Know the company. This is so important. You do not want to go into an interview and ask the employer, what are your values? What is it that you all do? Can you explain that a little bit further? So it's good to ask questions while you're in the interview, but you don't want those to be things that you could have Googled before, right? So take your time, research the company that you're going to work with, and just make sure that you know enough about them that you can have that interactive conversation without having to always ask, huh, what is that? Okay, so anything you could Google, you need to take the time and look it up. Be confident. This one is probably honestly the hardest. Interviews are kind of scary, right? We all get a little bit nervous. We get the sweaty palms, but it does make a difference when you walk in with confidence. Okay, so I know that that's really, really hard, but try to remember these are just people. It's their job. They go home and eat dinner and have families and live a normal life. Okay, so don't be too nervous. Just know that they're normal people too, and try to connect with them on a personal level if possible in the interview. It will help you to be a little bit more confident and a little bit less nervous. Don't just talk to talk. This is very important because in an interview, obviously your interviewee will have so many questions that they want to ask. I remember interviewing one candidate, and I think we had a list of probably like 12 to 15 questions. I think we got through 3. The candidate just talked and talked and talked and talked. And it's really great to, again, be descriptive when you're in an interview and share those examples. When I say share examples, I don't mean 20, give a couple, but you don't want to just keep rambling, right? That shows probably that we're nervous on the one hand, and also it shows a disconnect in how we communicate with people. So just kind of read the room. Your answers should be nice and thorough, but then also when you're done answering, just be done answering. It's okay to not ramble. Always speak highly of others. This is crucial. If you have an interviewee that asks, what's your current job like? And tell us about your employer. And you just start telling them, well, my boss is the worst and I hate working there because blah, 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 blah. They probably won't want to hire you because they're not going to know what you're going to say about them in 2 weeks, right? So make sure that you're always speaking highly of others. Even if you do have some confrontation with a previous employer or another coworker, just make sure that you talk about how that was more challenging instead of ever talking down about someone. Ask questions. So this is really important. It shows that you're engaged. It shows that you've come prepared. I usually, when I go into an interview, try to have 3 questions ready that would make sense. And they can be kind of generic, but something that I think is really helpful is to pay attention throughout the interview and have questions ready that engage the people that are hiring you based on conversations that you've had. So I know in one of my more recent interviews, I was able to ask about more detailed pieces of the program that I would be working with. And I think that that makes a difference because it shows that you're really paying attention to what the interviewees are saying and explaining to you. Because a lot of times in interviews, they will kind of go a little bit deeper into a job. So just kind of write down notes throughout and be ready to ask questions about that when possible. Okay, so now we've got the resumes down and we've got the interviews down. So let's talk about actually taking your leadership experience to the next level. Okay, so there is a book called The Ideal Team Player by Patrick Lencioni. And this book actually describes kind of the characteristics of people that really stick out in the workplace, stick out in a good way, not a bad way, that really stand out and they really make a difference. And so this goes beyond, it goes about taking those skills that you have and actually utilizing them to make a really big difference. So in this, he talks about 3 different kind of characteristics for the ideal team player. The first one is someone who is humble. So someone who's humble is going to lack ego. They're going to point out contributions of others. They don't seek recognition and they share credit. Okay, so these are the people that you're going to work with, or maybe you have some in your student organization now. When they're sharing about an accomplishment, you always hear them say we instead of I. We worked together and we created this. We did this and this, right? So these are the people that are really going to bring in the others instead of trying to shine the light on themselves. Hungry is the next one. This isn't just hungry for food, but someone who's hungry, they have a lot of drive, right? So they're always working hard, self-motivated and diligent, always looking for more to do. So these are the people in your organization that you say, hey, can you help me do this? And they come back really quick and they say, what else can I do for you? Or maybe they go and they take a project and they do 10 times above already what you asked. Those kind of people are what we would call hungry. And the last one is smart. And this isn't book smart. This is actually people smart. So people who are emotionally intelligent, they have common sense about people and good judgment and intuition when working with others. So they know, let's say they go into a meeting and someone says, oh, I'm having a really rough day. They don't just go, all right, let's get to the agenda, right? They're the kind of people that are going to engage with you and make sure that everything's okay before jumping into the work. So Patrick Lencioni refers to this as the ideal team player. So the ideal team player is going to be all three of those. They're going to be humble, hungry, and smart. So I bring all of this up because this is important, especially once you get into that job. You want to be the ideal team player, right? So we want to use those skills that we have, those leadership, those communication skills, and those all play into this and how we can be the ideal team player. So I put those skills that we've talked about, the competencies up there. So I just want to kind of talk through what that can look like. So let's say for communication is going to probably pull more on one of these. So a lot of times I would probably say communication pulls more towards the smart, right? So we want to be people smart when we communicate with other people. Now you also still want to be humble and hungry, but it really is going to pull on that people smarts part of your skill set. So if you don't have people smarts, your communication may not be very good when you get into the workforce, right? You might even struggle a little bit as you try to communicate about that resume in your interviews. Let's say leadership. So at the top, leadership is one that actually you're going to be pulling from all three of these. So we don't want a leader who's just hungry, right? What happens if we have a leader that's just hungry? They leave everybody else in the dust. They're saying, I did it, even though the whole team worked together. And then they also don't know how to work super well in a team. So we want a leader that's going to be hungry, humble, and smart, that can work really well with everyone, can engage the entire team, and then also is going to really push and drive to hit new goals. So kind of you want to make sure that when you're using these skills, some of them, like I said, communication pulls more from one, leadership needs to pull from all three. You are going to be pulling from all three. And this is the ideal team player that you want to be. And this is a way that you want to represent yourself in those interviews, is being able to show that you can be all three of these things. Most employers, they do want to see that you have a drive. You're really excited to work. They also want to see that you can share the credit with other people. You can work on a team, and they want to see that you are people smart. Again, you can work on a team. You can communicate well with other people. This is actually a really great book. So if you have some time to read it, it's a short and it's in a fable setting, but it's really helpful in just kind of setting up that work area in what you want that to look like. Okay, so there is a self-assessment that goes with this book, and I think it's really helpful for us to kind of just assess ourselves, see where we're at in this, and then look for areas to grow. So you can pause here and take just a couple minutes and fill this out. It's on a scale of 1 to 3. So 3 is usually you do this, 2 is sometimes, 1 is rarely. This is also located in that OneDrive folder. Take some time, assess where you are, and then reflect a little bit. Where's some areas that you need to work on? Think about this in your student organization maybe. And then really think through, what do I need to be working on? Maybe I'm super humble, but I am not hungry. I don't really push our organization further. Or maybe you are really, really hungry, but you forget to share the accomplishments with the others on your leadership team. So take a couple minutes, do this self-assessment, and reflect on where you want to grow as a leader. And then after you've done that, we're going to talk about a couple interview questions. So these interview question examples also come from the ideal team player, and they focus in on being humble, hungry, and smart. And so these are actually interview questions that we utilized when I worked for the Ramsey Solutions. And then I also, so getting hired there, I was asked some of these in my interview. So good interview questions here, just some ideas. Have you ever worked with a difficult colleague or boss? How did you handle the situation? Okay, so we've already kind of talked on this a little bit. But again, if you have worked with a difficult colleague or boss, this one's kind of hitting on that people smarts. So, how can you represent that really well without basically bashing someone, right? How did you handle that? Even though they were difficult, were you able to communicate with them well? Were you able to find solutions around that? And how did you handle that? It does tell a lot about a personality, about your personality. What is your greatest weakness? Everyone probably has had this in interviews. This is a very typical interview question. A lot of times, what employers want to see is that you can be humble and admit that you do have a weakness, and that's okay because guess what? We all do, right? We all have different weaknesses. And one thing that I always find important when asking this question is, can someone share how they're working on that without me prompting them? But how are you working to grow that? So maybe it is a weakness, but what are your next steps to make it better and improve? Another great question: what is the hardest you've ever worked on something in your life? This one goes back to being hungry, right? So we want to hear people say, talk about something that has really challenged them and then how that challenge has benefited them. So making sure that you're really bringing in lots of examples there and just showing how much growth you got from that, because we all know usually the easy stuff in life is not the things that we grow the most from. So something that you've worked really hard on, it's a great way to represent how you're hungry. Last one, as an example, is, can you tell me about someone who's better than you in an area that really matters to you? This is such a hard interview question, at least for me. And it's hard to admit, well, if this person's better than me at this. But this goes back to that humble piece. Can you have the humility to say, this person is better at me, and I'm working to try and get a little bit better at this? That's really important. So again, these four are examples of how questions that employers might ask that hit on that humble, hungry, and smart. So just make sure that you're kind of thinking through that. And in that OneDrive folder, you'll see a longer list of questions and kind of an explanation underneath of what employers are kind of looking for when they ask those questions. Okay, so that is all that I have. So just remember to work on those sheets, try to really hone in your different skills, because employers do want to know that you're engaged on campus. They care. You showing that you're active on campus is showing them that you're going to be active in their organization. You're going to try to take on leadership roles, and you're really going to push yourself. And then make sure to represent yourself from that ideal team player lens: humble, hungry, and smart. So I appreciate you all joining today, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, or come on by the Career Center and we'd love to look at your resume.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Krista. And again, just a reminder to everyone, this is one of our Thursdays at 3 leadership series. And I hope you can join in next time, Thursday, 3 o'clock, to learn more about how to stay involved on campus. Thanks, Krista.